What's up? Alexander here with Date Psychology. So today, I'm going to talk to you about recovery after a breakup. We've all been through breakups. I've been through many in my life. I'm going to go over some of the research on what strategies people use to recover and kind of sum it up with some practical advice, kind of like a strategy plan if you're going through a breakup or anything like that. Well, something maybe you can use to make it easier on yourself. These are some papers. I'm just going to summarize the results. If you want to go to the papers, they're all going to be listed in the slides. So this first paper I came across looked at a bunch of different variables. What predicted who recovered better and faster from the relationship? Dating someone else did, some personality variables did, but many characteristics of the relationship did not. For example, the length of the relationship didn't in this paper. People reporting being more and less in love didn't. And the time spent together didn't. This is a theme I've seen across a lot of these papers. I'm not including every single one because there's so much on this topic. But I think people tend to think that a bad relationship is easier to get over, a good relationship is harder to get over, whatever the case may be. Actually, the results are kind of mixed on this, but it doesn't seem very clear that the nature of the relationship is something that predicts the difficulty as far as moving forward, at least as far as interpersonal aspects are concerned. So that's something to keep in mind going forward then. It's not necessarily about the relationship or the other person or what it was like. People can have terrible breakups, people can have terrible relationships, break up and have a really hard time with the breakup. People can have really good relationships, break up and get over it relatively quickly. So what goes into that instead? The kinds of strategies people use when they go through it and how they make their exit, basically. Is it a smooth transition or is it a prolonged transition? We're going to go forward and get into that. Let's look at the next slide here. Facing a breakup, this looked at some electromyographical readings as well as self-report measures here. So one of the things across a few of these papers as far as predicting breakup recovery was self-definition, or essentially the way one sees their own self-identity. How closely are you independent, or how closely are you related to the other person in the sense that your identity is very closely intertwined with that other person. If it's very closely intertwined, you might have more difficulty breaking up. The thoughts that go through people's heads when this happens is like, how can I live without them? I'm nothing without them. That kind of a thing. Individuals who are more independent, who realize that they have worth outside of the relationship, who have an identity that is distinct from their partner, they have an easier time breaking up. So let's go on to the next one and see. This is a topic that comes up because this is actually really, really common. When people are breaking up, especially if they're cohabiting or married or whatever the case may be, it's often, a prolonged thing. You can't just walk out the door. There's a lot to do. So what happens? People often have sex with their ex. It's very, very common. And when someone attempts to do this, it's very, very often successful. So they ask participants, did you try to do this? How many actually did it? Typically, if people are trying to have sex with their ex, they can. And this doesn't actually predict the breakup or the recovery. So sometimes I think people are having sex because they want to retain a mate, they miss the physical contact, they're horny, whatever the case may be. But it didn't predict recovery from the breakup. So it didn't necessarily make it easier, but also it didn't predict, staying together after the breakup. People continue to have sex with their ex even when they're very sure that they're going to break up. What happened though? It did increase attachment to the ex. So it prolongs the breakup. And so that's a problem if you're trying to move on easily, right? You don't want to continue having sex with your ex. You kind of want to cut that off, even if you're already decided, even if you know it's just a sex thing. I think for women that might be easier to cut off. For men, perhaps not. But let's go on to the next slide here. Getting over a relationship breakup, testing two interventions. So here we have an experimental design. They had individuals that had journaling, an online support group for people that have gone through breakups, a chat room online, and then nothing. What did they find? The breakup support group and journaling, they both facilitated breakup recovery. So we will, look into this in some future papers that we're going to go through in this video, but the idea is essentially not to be alone. Why would journaling help? Well, perhaps because it's a form of catharsis, right? People can get out all of those emotions and things. What's one thing people often do during a breakup, even when they know that they're going to break up? They argue with the ex, right? They go back and forth. They write out really long texts and emails and all of that. A good strategy here is maybe don't send those. Write them in a journal instead. Write them in Notepad in your phone. Wait, sit on it. Think, do I really want to send this? Because every time you send a new message, every time you prolong that contact, you're essentially restarting the process instead of just moving on. And we're going to get into that also too, because one of the things that you want to do during a breakup is to kind of cut it off, right? You don't want to prolong it or kind of reform that attachment over and over. And then, you're resparking the attachment. You're going through these arguments. You're writing things out. You probably do want to vent. You can vent in a journal. You can vent in Notepad, right? Social support, as far as the chat room goes. You don't want to be isolated when you're going through a breakup. You want to talk. You want to vent. But it probably shouldn't be to the ex, right? It probably should be to other people close to you. Friends, family, whatever the case may be. Strangers in a chat room even. It seems to work well. But, getting those thoughts and feelings out are important. So, Facebook surveillance of former romantic partners, associations with post-breakup recovery. Another paper on here, and there's a lot about this. Essentially, social media makes breakups harder in the modern era. Why is that? Because we already know that reminders of an ex don't facilitate the breakup, right? So what have people always done when they're breaking up? They kind of get rid of everything, right? They want to throw the old gifts away that were given, get rid of pictures and all of that. And this is a very effective strategy. Social media makes that harder because maybe you're still on social media. Maybe you're tempted to go and surveil their social media, see what they're up to, see what they're posting. Maybe you want to ruminate, right? You want to go and look at their pictures. You probably have a bunch of pictures in the house and on your phone and whatever if you're someone that's been living together. This is exactly what you don't want to do. And this is a really robust predictor and a very large effect, by the way, of not getting over the breakup very well. So yeah, sometimes I think people think it's kind of petty or immature, like, oh, they blocked me on social media and they deleted all their pictures and that sort of thing. Actually, this is a really, really good strategy if you want to break up, if that's what you want to do and you're really serious about it. It's like purge all of that stuff. Basically, so don't talk to your ex on social media. Don't look at their social media. And really, it's beyond just social media. You don't want to expose yourself to things that remind you of the ex. So a change of scenery, a change of place, people that move out might have an easier time after the breakup because it's like, oh, you're no longer in the same apartment or whatever where you shared that with your ex. So, you don't want to have a bunch of things around that constantly remind you over and over because cognitively, on a neural basis, what does that do? Reinforces memories, right? It reinforces the memories associated with that. And you don't want that. You want to do the opposite of that. You want to break those memories, which means you simply don't want to be repeatedly exposed to the same stimuli over and over that remind you of your ex. Next slide. So there's stages of the breakup, right? And they're the same as the stages of grief, essentially. We will get into that a little bit as well. But what do we want to get to? That final stage, acceptance, right? That is kind of when the recovery begins. Leading up to that, you have anger and all of that, depression. You want to get to that acceptance stage. So the sooner you can accept that the relationship is over, the sooner you can begin to recover from it. A lot of people initially, when they're breaking up, they're going back and forth. They're thinking like, I don't want it to end. They're bargaining. They're trying not to. They're having doubts. They're questioning it, regardless of how they felt up to that point. Like I said, it can be a terrible relationship. Both people can know it, right? The whole world can see it. They can think this relationship is awful. They should have broken up a long time ago. And you will see that those two people, they break up, they get back together. They break up, they get back together. And they almost always end up broken up, but they prolong it. They drag it out for a really long time because they can't quite get to that acceptance phase. One thing, that you want to stop doing is essentially rumination, right? You don't want to ruminate. You don't want to go over it over again. And this is not just true with like good memories, right? Because if you go thinking about good memories, you're going to think, oh, all of these things were good. I kind of regret it. What's going on? This is also true if you ruminate about bad things, right? The idea is not to have thoughts about the ex, ideally, in the long run, right? So not angry thoughts, not happy thoughts, just to kind of get over it and get to the point where you do not think about them at that point. Let's go on here. So, downregulation of love feelings after a romantic breakup. Self-report and electrophysiological data. So again, another self-report combined with physiological measurements. What do we know? There's two strategies that do seem to work as far as downregulating feelings of love that persist after a breakup. And if you've been broken up with and you're not the one that initiated, you might still have a lot of those feelings. You might think, this person I loved a lot just broke up with me. So one thing that does seem to work is a negative reappraisal of the ex. People do this, I think, instinctively, right? They tell themselves stories about how horrible the ex is, makes them feel better. It doesn't work as well, however, as distraction. Don't think about the ex. And it's kind of like the pink elephant thing, right? If I say, don't think about a pink elephant, pops into your mind. You can't stop yourself from thinking about something that way. Instead, what you have to do is think about other things. You have to stay busy. You have to be occupied with a bunch of other things that are taking up so much of your focus and time that you're no longer thinking about the ex because you're thinking about other things. So distract yourself with whatever it may be, hobbies, work, talking to other people, and so on. Next slide here. So on the rebound, right? Focusing on someone else helps anxiously attached individuals let go of ex-partners. So this is looking at attachment styles, but again, there's a lot of research on this as well. And there's a lot of debate on this as well, isn't there? Just within, pop psychology and dating discourse and all of that. Like, should you immediately go into a relationship after you've broken up? I think a lot of the conventional kind of pop wisdom on that is like, no, you need to take some time to work on yourself, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't seem to be typically what the research shows as far as facilitating getting over a breakup. Rebounds help people get over a breakup. So one mechanism for this is higher perception of alternative mate availability. So it's not even just that the rebound itself helps, but it's the knowledge that there are other people available. I'm attractive to them. I can get someone else. I'm not going to be alone. Just having that belief by itself without, hooking up with anyone else, without getting a new romantic partner, that does it. Okay. So it's the people that think I'm never going to get anyone else that have a really hard time with breakups. But people that have rebounds more quickly, if they go into new relationships more quickly, they get over it much more quickly as well. Here, we'll go on to the next slide because there's a little bit more on that. So this is a video, Andrew Huberman, a neuroscientist, and it's about grief. But, if you lose someone because they die, relationship loss, breakups also have a form of grief, right? They induce grief. And again, like I said, even if the relationship is bad, even if you're the one that initiates the breakup, you still feel those things. And, the first thing here on this slide, the 5 stages, right, of loss, of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So at first, people think it's not real, perhaps especially if they're the one being broken up with. Like, I can, get them back, and then they're mad because it happened. Then they go into the bargaining. And that's, I think, where these things get drawn out a really long time, because the bargaining is not just trying to get them back. It's about rationalization and justification, right? It's about prolonging contact with that person in a sense. So this is when you begin to see people accuse each other of things. They're trying to have closure. They're not necessarily trying to reconcile, but they may be. They might think, like, I want to leave on good terms. I might want to still be friends with them. They're going back and forth. They're going back and forth. In the end, they break up anyway. They're going to drift apart. They're not going to have any contact. But they go through this prolonged bargaining phase, right? And then after that, once people realize, like, okay, the link is a little bit severed, they feel bad. They go through that stage of depression. They exit that, and then they're in acceptance. They've accepted that, okay, it's over. This is my life now, and they can go on forward. Important in this video to understand, and we'll look at this when we go into the final slide, is there are these 3 dimensions of attachment. What makes a person attached to anything at all, as Andrew Huberman talks about in this video, which after this, maybe watch that one as well. Space, time, and closeness. And this is not just attachment in romantic relationships. This is your relationship to any other object out there in the world, right? The closer things are in space, the closer things are in time, the more attachment you have. So for example, if someone lives halfway across the world, you can't just reach out and touch them, right? But if you can just reach out and touch them, and then suddenly you can't, that can seem like more of a loss, right? If the breakup happened just yesterday, it's going to seem like more of a loss than it happened 4 weeks ago, right? So keep those in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that for a lot of people, these feelings of grief, they activate reward. And this is what happens when people get into complicated grief, right? And it stays prolonged a very long time. And I think in the context of relationships, because grief activates reward and anger also does those sorts of things, then it's very tempting to get into long discussions with an ex, to want to fight, to be kind of sucked into those things, as opposed to, or even to want to reach out, right? Not even necessarily just to fight, but to have some kind of contact, some kind of friendship, whatever the case may be. It's very tempting to kind of go back and forth and get sucked into these patterns, because even if it's a bad fight, even if it's some kind of post-breakup argument that, you feel worse after it, it's still kind of activating reward. So instead, what you want to do to sever these links, to rewire the brain, is essentially cut that space, that time, and that closeness. You want to create as much distance as you can in space and time, and physical proximity as well. Let's go on. Final slide. We're going to summarize, this research, and here's, kind of a practical strategy as far as how to get over a breakup quickly and easily. It's almost like going cold turkey in a sense, right? Cut contact, essentially. So, first point here, you want to limit contact with your ex. Ideally, you want to end it completely if you can. Just stop talking to them, 100%. And in many cases, that's not possible, right? If you live with someone or something like that, there's going to be, a lot of logistics as far as getting through that, getting to the end of it. But that would be, the ideal thing, is to limit contact as much as possible. If you're having fights, you're restarting the process. You're reinforcing those links in your brain. The same if you're not having fights. If you're having discussions that you think are good, you're trying to get some kind of closure. Is closure even real? We don't know. But what we do know is that time, and the separation by distance is what helps people get over relationships. As we mentioned, breakup sex, people that continue to have sex, it increases attachment. So these are all things that don't help. What does help? Limiting contact as much as possible, waiting, fight the temptations to reach out, to do anything like that. Similarly to that, we've seen the research on social media. You want to get rid of reminders of your ex. If you have pictures that are popping up, or you're looking at their social media, you got a lot of stuff around you, they've given you gifts. You might feel bad if someone's giving you gifts, just like throwing them in the garbage or whatever. You don't have to throw them in the garbage. Put them in the attic. After a period of time passes, you'll be able to get them, you'll look at them, you won't feel anything, and you'll be okay. You'll have those reminders. But I think some people feel like doing this is cruel or petty or whatever, but it's like, this is actually what seems to work really well, especially with social media. You don't want to be looking at their social media. You don't want to see their things popping up all the time. Again, you want to reach out to social support. You don't want to be alone. So friends, family members, whoever, you want to talk, you want to vent, you want to do these things, but you need someone to do that with. You don't want it to be with the ex, right? But you do need it, and you need to be around people. It can be just like going to a bar or a hobby. Sometimes it feels just good just to get out of the house and walk around, go have dinner, even if it's by yourself, right? Have a coffee at a cafe in the morning, whatever the case may be. Be around people, ideally. Talk to people. You can rant and vent as long as they will let you do it, I suppose. But, don't self-isolate. You don't want to just be chilling alone. Date or find a new relationship, right? And like I said, in our folk psychology and all of that, some people say, don't immediately go out and date. You're going to be bringing baggage into the new relationship, or, you need a period of time or whatever. As far as the research shows, as far as what helps people get over relationships, rebounds do, right? And new relationships do as well. So that's something to consider there, is that, probably, especially if you find yourself in a new relationship. One of the papers, I'm not sure if I posted it, but talked about that. People essentially who enter new relationships quickly following another relationship. And it's like, yeah, that seems to help them a lot get over it. Probably, related to if you can find someone else, yeah, you're not going to be too focused on the ex as if you were entirely alone and isolated. You don't want to ruminate, right? You don't want to keep running in circles in your mind about the ex or anything like that. So you want to distract yourself. That's how you avoid rumination, is you do other things that take your mind off it that you have to focus on. And ultimately, yeah, you want to reach that point of acceptance, right? Where you realize that nothing you say is going to change it at this point, that it's over, that any discussions you have are not going to be productive, right? That even if you're angry at that person, you don't feel the need to reach out and express that anger toward them. You don't feel the need, to get justification from them or get them to apologize or realize what they've done. You don't feel the need to justify yourself. You've accepted just simply, this is it. It's over. We're not together anymore. We don't really have contact anymore, and so on. And when you get to that point, yeah, that's typically when kind of the real recovery begins. So, hope you liked the video. I'll make another one for you very soon. Like, subscribe, hit the bell. Look at the link in there. We got a Patreon. We have a private Discord. We talk about research. Here people submit ideas for the videos, for surveys, and all of that. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys very soon.